We're lucky this morning to have Ken Good to talk to us. This is another one of those issues where you might think it's an abstruse legal issue or something involving politics, but we're going to talk about how this really does affect everybody, because it affects your day-to-day life out there when you're just going about things, trying to take care of your life. Ken is a graduate of Texas Tech Law School over 30 years ago. He's a 30-year-plus lawyer. When he was in law school, he was on law review. That is about the highest honor that a law student can earn. Only the very top law students make law review. Those are the scholarly legal journals of the legal profession. Ken has argued at the Texas Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court. It's a Supreme Court in Texas for criminal cases. So Texas essentially has two Supreme Courts, one for civil cases and one for criminal cases. Ken's argued at both of those, and he's argued at the Federal Fifth Circuit, which is the circuit that includes Texas and New Orleans and Mississippi, Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, and it's headquartered in New Orleans. He's one of the top attorneys in his field in the area of bail bond law. Ken, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's awful early.
It is early, so welcome to our world, Ken. We appreciate you getting up to enlighten people on this issue. Ken, I woke up again this morning to another headline, this one from New York, where a man who had shoved somebody in the subway onto the subway tracks had this serious history. He'd been arrested many times before and all of that. I'm not sure about his bail bond status there, but frequently when we get these stories, we hear that they were already out on bond and they have current charges, and that they're already out on bond and recommitting other crimes. Can you tell us, first of all, what is a bail bond? How does it work? How do judges set bail bonds? How do they decide what to set? And how has this traditionally worked? And what is the role of the bail bondsman?
Well, bail is the assurance that you're giving to the court that you'll come back to answer the criminal charges. It dates all the way back to the Magna Carta, which is all the way back hundreds of years ago in England, which was the very first restrictions placed on the king's ability to just hold somebody. Back then, you would accuse somebody of a crime and they'd just hold them forever, and until they just agreed to do whatever you wanted them to do. The Magna Carta put restrictions for the first time on the king's ability to do that, and so that's kind of where the beginning of bail started. At one point, 200 years ago, if you posted bail for somebody, or if you spoke for somebody and they got out of jail and they didn't show up for court, you took their place. We've kind of changed it and modernized it, but now it's the assurance that you give to the court that you'll come back. We hear all the time that say, well, I've got a presumption of innocence, so I shouldn't have to do that. No, that's not a consideration for setting bail. The considerations are set out in Article 1715 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and there's a whole list of things you take into consideration. Probably the most important is the criminal history. But the types of bail that we use in Texas or across the country, we have personal bonds or PR bonds, or that would just be like in New York, release on no bond. That would be one type. And then a personal bond is really a free bond. Even in Texas, when you have to place an amount on it, a $100 PR bond is still a free bond. You're just promising that if you don't show up, you'll pay $100 in the future, but you never get prosecuted for that, or they never try to collect that. Then you've got the private industry. You call that various different things, but it's the private industry, a surety bond. And then you've got what we call cash bonds. And, sometimes the names get interchanged. Like in Illinois, we hear all the time they're getting rid of their cash bonds. They're getting rid of cash bonds. They got rid of surety bonds a long time ago, and we see them reaping the rewards of that already. For many years, they've had chaos in their criminal justice system. And so I think, if we think of bail as just the assurance that you're going to give the court that you'll come back to answer the criminal charge, that's the reason why we release you on bail. We know you'll come back. So
somebody gets arrested. They go in front of a judge. The judge considers the seriousness of the crime they're charged with, right?
Yes.
They consider that person's resources, their ability to pay a bond. The judge isn't going to put $1 million bond on somebody charged with a minor crime who doesn't have any resources, right?
That's true, but the reformers want to make that the only consideration, and it's just one of many and probably the most important consideration is their criminal history, because once you have a criminal history, if you can't afford the bail, well, then that's just, I mean, your risk. You have a criminal history, so then the ability for you to pay it goes down. If you have no criminal history, then your ability to pay should be given greater weight.
So that
reformers want to make that the most important element or the only element, and that's wrong.
Okay, so you got to 2 points there that I wanted to make sure we covered, which is the judge is supposed to consider the defendant's criminal history. At least historically, that's what judges have done. And then you mentioned what the reformers want to do, the anti-cash bail reformers who are really part of the overall criminal justice reform effort. Go ahead and explain what the people advocating the elimination of cash bail want, and then we can go in and talk also about how that has affected life in the criminal justice system in the areas that have adopted those laws. But first, tell us what do the anti-cash bail people want to achieve?
Well, I would say the anti or the pro-criminal justice reform group is made up of a coalition. And there's some on the coalition that just want to be more generous, like Christians or Catholics. We want to be more generous. In probably 10 years ago, we were in a very safe time period. We felt safe. And so when people are saying we're being too critical or we're too hard on people, then we feel safe. We can let up our guard some. But there's part of this coalition that wants to create chaos. They don't believe that certain crimes should be crimes anymore, and that these are there's a certain element of this coalition that believes that the criminals are the real victims and not the victims of the crimes. And so I think that there's a portion of this coalition that wants to decriminalize a lot of crime, especially misdemeanor crime. You see that especially in New York and in California with Proposition 47. And so I think the coalition is kind of crumbling because the parts that didn't buy into let's decriminalize a bunch of crime are waking up, because I think every day it's becoming more and more clear that the goal is to create chaos, and creating chaos creates decriminalization. Because if you're making a situation where they can't prosecute crimes, they're having to dismiss them, like in Harris County where they're dismissing 72% of misdemeanors for the last 2 years. And I looked at August, it was over 90%, that of all the cases disposed in misdemeanor court, they were over 90% dismissals. You have to conclude that the goal of a segment of this group is just decriminalization. And that's what's driving this increase in crime. Because who's stepping into the void? Organized crime, gangs, career criminals. And they're seeing it as a clear green light to just wreak havoc. That's the reason why we're seeing kind of like converter theft take off. And the surrounding counties where this takes place have noticed it. In Harris County, you've got Montgomery County putting up a billboard that says, we support law enforcement and we prosecute criminals. And so the criminals that wander into Montgomery County are shocked. They're like, "Oh, you're taking me to the wrong jail." They're like, "You're not in Harris County. You're in Montgomery County now." It's like, "You're not in Kansas anymore, buddy. You're in our town."
So, in terms of the role of the anti-cash bail people, then, what they're essentially advocating is that defendants be released on their own signature, simply by signing a piece of paper frequently without having to put up any security to guarantee that they will appear in court for their court dates. After the break, we'll come back and talk more about the consequences of the no cash bail effort. Talking about and confronting this movement to eliminate traditional bail, which is where defendants have to post some sort of security, usually by getting a bond from a professional bail bondsman to show that they will return to court. Ken, we talked about how bail bonds traditionally work and how the no cash bail movement wants to eliminate the requirement that defendants post a bond or some sort of security to guarantee that they will show up in court. The movement's achieved considerable success, though. New York reformed their bail bond laws in 2019. Illinois has passed a law called the Safety Act, which will take effect in January. So What are the results that we're seeing where the effort to get rid of cash bail is already taking effect across the country?
Well, we're starting to see rollbacks. I mean, Alaska passed reform, and then the next year they were like, oh, my God, what did y'all talk us into doing, and brought back the same people to testify, and then started rolling it back, repealing the statutes. We've seen that in multiple jurisdictions, even in New York, which is completely controlled by Democrats. They've had 2 rollbacks, and they talked about having a special session before the election, which tells you that the politicians were feeling the heat of it. And then I think we're, even in Harris County, we're seeing a tremendous pressure to roll back the reforms that have taken place. And so I think we're actually we're coming out of this period of reform, and I think we're actually now coming into a period of a backlash where we need to hold more people in jail, and just do it as a bright line across the board thing. So I think we're seeing the pendulum swing really hard in the other direction, and maybe even too far.
Well, just last month, the Houston Chronicle reported that a man who has already been convicted of 6 felonies. Now, this man already has 6 felony convictions, was out on bail for murder, and then went and committed additional crimes because although they did require cash bail for his murder, it was only a $150,000 bond. And you can explain to people the way that works, or you can confirm the way that works generally is the person goes to a bail bondsman and puts up a fraction of that, makes payments. The bail bondsman guarantees the $150,000. So it's not as if that money is coming out of the defendant's pocket, but the man then goes on to get another felony charge for burglary. And we see these stories over and over in Houston. We've seen them in New York, and that's the fear of many of the people in Illinois. So I presume that's the backlash you're talking about, as people are beginning to see that these no cash bail policies have a real effect on the day-to-day safety of regular law-abiding citizens.
Well, there's a candidate running for county judge in Harris County. Her name is Alexandria Mealer. I think she really says it in a good way. And what she makes is when we're releasing somebody based on the crime they've committed and not looking at their criminal history, so it's a crime-based release, that is a mistake. So as long as you only commit this crime, and that's all we look at, we're not looking at how many times you've done it or what else you've done in your criminal history. We're just looking at the type of crime and basing release upon that. That's where we have our career criminals, gang members, and everything concentrate on those crimes and step into that void and take advantage of the system. And that's the reason why we changed SB 6. The problem we're having with Harris County is they've made a decision that they're just not going to follow state law, and they're just ignoring it. And they're hiding behind a settlement that they entered into in federal court, which, sometimes we see that where we weaponize a federal court so that we change the law and we say, oh, it's been compelled by a federal court. No, it was a settlement agreement, and it was done where everybody agreed. I mean, it was not really adversarial but at that point. And so we have this decision where we're just not going to follow Texas law anymore. And you have this fight, especially in Houston, between the legislature and the local officials. And that's really what this is. Are we going to be a law and order community, or are we going to, are we going to be like in L.A. where the DA says, well, we just have a disagreement over who the real victim is?
Well, Ken, just yesterday morning, there was a news report coming out of New York, which passed their law in 2019, and then saw a lot of crime committed, especially in New York City, by people who are out on no bail or low bail. So now the governor of New York, who is up for re-election, has said that she is open to reviewing the bail law and looking at bail data when New York has their next legislative session. So no doubt that plays into what you're talking about, as that there's a backlash against some of this. But you've also spoken with people from other parts of the country. You've talked with bail bondsmen from California. Other than places like New York and Harris County, Texas, and Illinois, where we know they've passed the SAFE-T Act, where else have these no cash bail laws or policies taken effect where the people have seen a negative response?
Well, California during the pandemic, they enacted a no cash bail, or system, because they have a county by county bail schedule, and so they switched over to a no cash bail for most crimes during the pandemic, and that's kind of like seeing bail reform on steroids. What happened there? I mean, it was so bad, and the problem they have is they had Prop 47, where they changed a lot of misdemeanor crimes to a lot of felony crimes to misdemeanors. And then we have prosecutors that elected not to prosecute crimes for like theft under $950. So now we have stores across California closing in their urban areas because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. And now they're even closing because they just can't provide a safe work environment for their employees. So it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound like, hey, that makes sense when you say we're going to switch over to a no cash bail or we're going to go to a low bail, we're going to be more generous, and how that creates chaos and all these things. Well, it just starts by nobody coming to court, and it's so simple. In our criminal system, under the constitutions, the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, and the Texas and the state constitution, your case can't go forward if you don't show up, so it gets put on hold. And on average, we're adding the same number of cases to the conveyor belt every day, every week, every month. And if you're switching to a system that slows down the conveyor belt for resolution of cases or stops it for a period of time, well, now you've got this huge backlog because the criminals, the organized criminals, are going to continue committing crimes. And so in the end, how do you alleviate the backlog?
Well, you're really getting onto the second effect of getting rid of cash bail. The first is we're letting out defendants too easily, and they're endangering other people in the community before they even have their previous crime adjudicated. They don't have a serious enough bail bond, and they get out on their signature on a low bail, and then we see them commit crimes again. But now you're getting onto the second.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. We have judges not doing their jobs when they could deny bail because they violate the conditions of the first bond, which a condition is don't cause another crime or don't commit another crime. And when they have the opportunity to deny bail, they are not doing it. And we say they're setting low bail, but they're not. They're declining the opportunities when they have the ability to deny bail.
And in terms of not just the safety, you're talking about the conveyor belt and the backlog of cases. It's the bail bondsman who really gets the defendants into court. I've worked on these cases myself. People who are movie fans know that there's a recurring theme in Hollywood of the bail bondsman who goes after the fugitive. And the plot always revolves around the idea that the bail bondsman has to get the fugitive back into court by a certain time, or the bail bondsman is going to lose a lot of money. There have been several movies along those lines. But that is the way it works in real life. If there is not a bail bondsman to go after people who don't show up for their court dates, then those people just aren't going to be caught until they just get caught by a happenstance. So they get pulled over on a traffic ticket, for example, because there are not enough police and sheriff's deputies and U.S. Marshals to go and look for everybody who fails to appear in court. So those cases simply get frozen. The defendants are out there running loose. The evidence is getting older. Those cases will often get dismissed, and then those people are getting off scot-free simply by ignoring their obligation to come to court, even though they've been given low bail or no bail. Now, I understand from your work that people are actually trying to take this no cash bail or low bail model from Harris County, Texas to Ohio and other parts of the country. Is that right?
Yes, I think everybody in Harris County would say it's been a complete fiasco, and the surrounding counties would say it's been a complete fiasco. But the the reformers, went to Ohio to the legislative session, and they have gone across across the country. But this summer they went to Ohio and said, Harris County is the gold standard of the way you should reform your criminal justice system, and it's working great, and you should adopt it statewide. And and they don't even talk about all the bad stuff. They just ignore it like it doesn't even happen.
I would have never known that.
Ken,
what's the failure to appear rate in Harris County that they're saying is the gold standard that the rest of the country ought to adopt?
According to HarrisCountyCourtWatch.com, the current average failure to appear rate for the misdemeanor courts for 2022 is over 80%. So on a docket of 100 people, over 80 people are not showing up. And there's examples of 100% not showing up for court on a given date. It's an example of chaos. It's an example of no cases getting resolved. And the Harris County model right now is a model of dismissal. When you look at August dispositions, and over 90% of the cases were dismissed. It's not a system that will take care of victims. It's a system where it takes care of hardened criminals. I mean, I don't know a politician arguing for that. I don't know what you would do, what you would argue instead if you were in the back pocket of organized crime.
Well, there is hope on the horizon, though. Apparently that you see with a backlash coming in the report from New York that even the New York governor is willing to reconsider some aspects of bail. They might be saying this grudgingly. They might be saying it because they're up for a hard time in re-election. They know people are fed up with high crime, but there is hope on the horizon for this aspect of our criminal justice and the safety of citizens out there. Ken Good, thank you very much for taking your time to share your expertise with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, stick around and we will be right back after the break.